You are listening to the Night and Day podcast, featuring the interview archives of Western New York music writer Thom Jennings. Thom has interviewed some of the biggest names in music and entertainment, and now you can enjoy these never-before-heard interviews. Here's your host, Thom Jennings.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Night and Day podcast. I'm your host, Thom Jennings, and it's been a long time since I've done one of these episodes. We had a pandemic and all kinds of crazy things happen over the years, but the podcast actually still gets a fairly decent amount of listens. So recently I recorded an interview with Carl Palmer of Emerson, Lake & Palmer, and he was talking about the upcoming Asia in Asia box set. So potentially by the time you listen to this, it'll already have been released. But I thought the interview itself was a good one. And in the past, I've interviewed Greg Lake, I've interviewed John Wetton, Jeff Downs. So almost all the Asia guys and almost all the ELP guys. Unfortunately, Keith Emerson is no longer with us, so that's not going to be a possibility. But maybe over the next few days, I'll try to get those up. And at the time of this recording, unfortunately, Yes drummer Alan White has passed away, so I have an interview with him that I'll be probably getting up as well. In the meantime, hope you enjoy this. I think it's a great interview. By all means, if you like this stuff, subscribe, listen, and I'll keep posting some more stuff.
Hello?
Yeah, hi, is this Carl?
Yes, speaking.
Hey, Carl, it's Thom Jennings from the Niagara Gazette. How are you doing today? So I guess we're talking about Asia in Asia, the upcoming box set, and
yep.
I've got a ton of questions on this because I'm a longtime Asia fan, and I remember the concert from stateside. It was broadcast overseas and everything.
Yeah.
I want to start out, first question, and this may have been asked before, and it may be obvious, but I mean, when the concert was originally planned, was Wetton still with the band?
Yes, so when we decided that we were going to take on a satellite broadcast, it was quite a large sort of amount of money that had to change hands to buy the time, to buy the satellite time, buy the connection into MTV, and there was a lot had to be done. And David Geffen was the one, Geffen Records, who we were signed to, was the one that suggested we do something like this, because it'd been done with many events to do with a sport, but nothing really to do with music. So this was all happening. It was the original band, and we were all talking about it, and we were all involved from the get-go. So Wetton was there. Yes, everything was fine. But unfortunately, as the time went by and we were getting closer and closer, John got a little bit panicky. John had a problem with alcohol, and he was a chronic alcoholic for many, many years. And he'd managed to contain it to a certain extent, but this just seemed to be topping him off and making it really, really difficult for him, to the point where, he kind of went missing and stuff. Now, he was a real good friend of mine, and I really enjoyed his company. And I have to say, the last 14 years of his life, he was absolutely straight, and he was singing better than what he did way back in the 80s. As you know, he died in 2017 in the January. So he was part of the decision-making. He was part of it. But when it came to the actual, we've now got to do this, we realized this was too much of a strain. And in all intensive purposes, we sort of had to fire John for that concert, as it were, and reinstate him back in 2007. I think we got back together in 2006. But for that particular period, we knew we couldn't carry on with John. And that's when John Kolodner, who was David Geffen's right-hand man, mentioned Greg Lake. Everyone thinks it would be to do with me, but, I didn't. I had nothing at all to do with that. It was Kolodner that came up with the idea. Greg did a terrific job, absolutely fantastic job. We rehearsed with him here in London, and that went really well. We then did a week with him down in the Kyushu Islands in Japan. And that went exceptionally well. Then we had a couple of days rehearsal in the Budokan, getting all the sound levels up and, everything like exactly right, as it were. And he did a great job. So we had about 2 weeks rehearsal for that concert and 2 or 3 days with the technical team just to make sure that, we'd got everything and the feeds and the visuals and everything was right. And miraculously, it was a great concert. It was broadcast impeccably, great visuals, great camera work, and sonically was as sound as you'll ever get, So very, very happy. And, obviously Greg pulled us out of that one because we would have had to cancel the satellite time, which would have been unheard of, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine what the financial implications would have been in terms of having to cancel. I mean, was Greg the only person that was kicked around as a potential? He was the only person
that was mentioned, mainly because here in the UK, we're quite a tight-knit sort of circuit of, friends. And of that period of time, the early 70s, there were only so many sort of like singers and prog rock bands that kind of, meant anything. And, John Wetton actually replaced Greg in King Crimson. So that was the connection. And John Wetton was a huge Emerson, Lake and Palmer fan and came to many, many concerts. That's how our friendship started to develop. And of course, it was quite ironic that Greg Lake was the one that replaced John Wetton in Asia. And he was really the only one that had a similar timbre to his voice and that would try and keep it as close to the original as we possibly could get it, which, you'll have to understand is just something that we needed to achieve at that moment in time.
Yeah, and I remember having this conversation, I think it was with somebody from Styx, where they were talking about, or maybe Journey, I don't know. But, I mean, there was a period of time like Rainbow. I mean, every time they got a new lead singer, it was somebody that sounded entirely different. I mean, I think on some level, you may have been one of the first bands that was able to, even though it was only for the very short period of time, kind of bring somebody in who was very close in terms of vocal stylings to the original vocalist.
Yeah, no, the phrasing, I mean, the actual timbre was slightly different, Greg was slightly lower in his presentation of his voice. But, it didn't affect the music. I mean, we didn't have to change any keys. So put it to you that way. So everything stayed in the same key. And when you write a piece of music, if you write it in one particular key, if you have to change the key, the melody does change. So that means if you have to change the key for a vocalist, the melody might be not quite as strong or might not sort of have the same sort of blend or whatever. So it was quite important that we kept it as solid as what we could to the original recording, which we managed to do with Greg. And, he did a great job. Hats off to him. It's just one of those things that we couldn't actually carry on with him. He was about to launch his own solo career, which he didn't actually relaunch anything, but that was his main sort of prerogative. That was his main sort of deal at the time. He wanted to launch a solo career. So, we said, okay, fine. Well, thanks for helping us. And that was it, really. But in this box set, I mean, you do have those recordings on vinyl. You have them on CD. And obviously there's a DVD in there of the whole thing. So it's quite a memorable package.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, there's been a few advanced tracks released, and I'm just blown away by, like, it just felt like the rest of the band had this real sense of urgency that the playing, everybody's playing with a huge intensity. And I'd seen a show from that tour in Rochester, New York, maybe, I don't know, 5-6 months before, and I remember thinking that the second tour just didn't quite have that intensity, but that show at the Budokan, I mean, you guys were firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, we were lucky. It was one of those nights that everyone played well and felt confident, even with the drawbacks of losing your lead singer, one of the lead writer, really. I mean, because John is a fantastic top line sort of a writer. So yeah, well, we were lucky. We were blessed that night. We were looked after. So more than happy. And as I say, extremely grateful to Greg Lake.
And yeah, I mean, do you think that maybe you had an advantage more so than, Steve and Jeff? Because I mean, the relationship between the bass player and the drummer is crucial. And I mean, I don't know if it's the new mix, but Greg's bass playing, on that night was, I mean, as much as people go, oh, Greg like did such a great job vocally, blah, blah, blah. But if you listen to his bass playing, he was really in the zone that night.
I mean, Greg, to explain that to you, I have to explain the makeup of Emerson, Lake and Palmer. So the makeup of Emerson, Lake and Palmer was in such a way where, Greg and I would talk about the Beatles and songs and Bridge Over Troubled Water and stuff like that. And we were very close from that point of view. And, he enjoyed McCartney's bass playing. We all enjoyed the Beatles. And then with Keith and I, the first time we sat down together and talked about jazz records that we'd got, the first 10 that we talked about, we'd both got. So our collections ran parallel. It was uncanny. So there was quite a lot of synergy within the group. And for Greg, Asia was actually probably the most natural band he could have been in, and possibly, he should have stayed in and put his solo career on hold because he had many times before anyway. But, he wanted to go off and do that, so we weren't going to stop him. And, he probably played the best that he ever played. I mean, he will tell you if he was alive today, God bless him, he would tell you that he played bass out of necessity. He wasn't a bass player. He was basically a folk singer. He played 6-string guitar and he sang folky tunes, poppy tunes. That's what he was. He liked a bit of cross picking, but he basically was an acoustic guitar player. And he, was asked to play bass by Bob Fripp in King Crimson. Though Greg had already played bass with a band called The Gods, it really wasn't, he wasn't going to be a lead player. He wasn't going to sort of make it on his own from the get-go, being, an acoustic guitar player doing, folky songs, little pop songs. So he tried to integrate that into a group, which he did. And the way he did that was by picking up the bass and playing bass. And at the end of the day, I mean, with Emerson, Lake and Palmer, the bass and drums had very little sort of going on together. I played, and Greg would just sort of follow me and just supply the energy. And that's what it was all about, really. And that made it work because there was Keith and I going off all over the place, me playing unison runs with Keith and this and that. So we needed somebody to act a bit like John Entwistle used to be in The Who, where he's basically the anchor man, And that's what Greg's part was in ELP. When he hit Asia, it was probably the first time that he actually hit that sort of happy medium where he really enjoyed playing just the bass.
Yeah, I mean, and it shows. I said I've always been a fan of Wetton's bass playing. I think he's underrated, but Greg and
highly
John...
underrated. To be honest with you, John Wetton is underrated as a bass player, and he was never a fantastic technician, incredibly musical. And let me tell you, I always measure a good bass player from the point of view: can I make him speed up? Can I get him to move at all going into the head of the chorus? And, Greg Lake, yes, you could a little bit because he enjoyed the energy. John Wetton was like the Rock of Gibraltar. You could not move him. And boy, did I always try.
That's funny. Yeah, there's a recording of him that's just coming out on vinyl soon that he did with Steve Hackett called the Tokyo Tapes. And yeah, it just really plays well. I'd say, a lot of times I guess maybe, again, it is... Sometimes you just have that great night, and like you said, that night at the Budokan.
It's one of those things. You don't know it's going to happen, and when it does, when you've got all of that stuff going on, don't forget, satellite broadcast was pretty, a musical broadcast into America, into MTV, was all very new at the time, and and it's the anniversary for that is next year actually, and we've been invited to go back and play. Possibly at the Budokan, the same promoters and everything would like us to come back. There's a huge following in Japan. Always has been a massive following there. So, yeah, we're going to consider that. We'll play in August, first of all. And, the band is different now. It's, as you know, it's on the bass guitar. We've got Billy Sherwood, who did the 2018 tour with us when we played with, actually he did the 2019 tour, when we were on that Royal Affair tour with, yes, Asia, Carl Palmer's ELP Legacy and John Lodge. There was that set up. And he played before that Billy, when we supported Journey. So he's been in there a little while now, and he was actually lead singer for a little while when we did the Journey tour in 2018. But the new guy up front now is Mark Bonilla, lead guitar and lead vocals. And Mark has a very, very similar voice to Greg Lake, in actual fact. And it was my idea to call up Mark Bonilla. And basically, when Keith Emerson was alive, he always talked about Mark, because Mark was in Keith's band. And I just kept it in mind. And when this opportunity came along to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the first Emerson, Lake and Palmer album, I thought, okay, how do we go about this? And I just said to Jeff Downs, why don't we try this guy? And he was all for it, and here we are.
Yeah, and I before I don't want to stray too far from the Budokan stuff, but I definitely have some other questions about that era of Asia, especially this year with the 40th anniversary of that first album. I'm actually looking at it on my wall, my autographed copy from that era, one of my most treasured pieces in my collection. But you mentioned the Budokan as a venue, and yes. I mean, so this is a place that the Beatles play. Cheap Trick had a famous album from there, Clapton, Bob Dylan. I mean, is there, when you go to a certain venue, do you, like maybe a Madison Square Garden or possibly Red Rocks or some of these other ones, is there something about the venue that could possibly make the show or the synergy a little bit different than, say, a place in Rochester?
There are always places, there are always places, Madison Square Garden being one of them, there's no doubt about that. Carnegie Hall being another one. As far as the Budokan being special, I'm not sure that it's special. It's just had some great artists play there, and they played well on the night, and it's been recorded, whether it be Cheap Trick or Clapton or whoever, and it's happened. It's not like, a great sounding sort of arena, as it were. There's no doubt about that, but not many of them are. But there's some excitement that's created in there. You have to understand that the Japanese are quite reserved. So if you visited Japan in the early 70s, like 73, when the LP went there, they would hardly clap at all until the song or tune or instrumental was over. Then they might clap. They would never clap solos. And when it was finished, the concert, they'd all stand up and they would kind of march out, like all very, very neat and tidy, and that was it. And they would go home. As you know, the concerts start about 5:30, 6 o'clock in Japan. Well, if you roll forward 10 years to when Asia went in the early 80s, they had changed completely, and things were different. They were more alive. They gave more, and they would always find out what hotel you're in, and you have no private life at all in Japan. I mean, all of this sort of honor and being very respectful, that goes out the window completely. I mean, none of that really exists at all. And the same at concerts. They scream and shout like any other audience that's excited. And possibly at the Budokan, it's got a bit of a history there already. So people go in there expecting to see a dynamite show, and 9 times out of 10, I'm sure they do.
So now this particular show, I think it was the second of 3 nights or whatever. When did you go back and listen to it again and decide that you were going to release it? I mean, it's 39 years after the fact.
We listened to it directly after the concert. We listened to the audio feed. Obviously, the camera stuff, we were obviously interested in, but we wanted to hear what the feed was like. And because it was done so well at the time, we were just, we just could not believe it. And then, we got to see the visuals. It was released on one of those laser discs originally with Greg Lake. If you had the equipment to play a laser disc, that's when we kind of first all saw the real thing. We saw rushes and stuff, which was great. I mean, the band normally wants to hear what the audio's like. I mean, we're selling sound, What we look like is another thing, but we're selling sound. And we were really... we were impressed. We thought, yeah, we got it there. And the Laserdisc then came out, but not many people had the hardware to play that. So, that sort of didn't really sort of do too much, which is to our advantage now, to be honest, in a way, because it was a monumental moment in time for the band. And I think this box set will just bring that home, actually. The presentation is marvelous. If you've got it there in front of you, you can see that there's a great glossy book in there. There's an envelope full of posters and ticket stubs, obviously made up, that's what it looked like on the night. There's a lovely enamel badge in there. So the presentation from BMG, who Asia is signed to, the first 3 albums of Asia are with Universal. Everything else we've ever done is with BMG. And BMG I work quite closely with because the ELP catalogue is with BMG. And they have some great people on their staff there. One person in particular, John Wilson, is just absolutely, fanatical about everything he does. So it was a pleasure putting this together and seeing, all the bits as they came through.
Yeah, I mean, you just came out with a really nice picture disc too of. I'll try to call it XXX, probably 30, whichever you want to call it. But everybody seems to have done a really well. I know you've had re-releases of the reunion records. I mean, it seems like things are really busy in Asia's camp, and I mean that's got to be on some level validating. This was a band, the super group.
It is. You have to understand that, with all this product coming out, I mean, it's really nice. I mean, it's difficult when you don't have the original band because you have to go out and sell it with new people in the band, though Billy Sherwood is not that new, having been there since 2018. But, the product is the product, and, we will go out there and represent those songs as well as we possibly can. And I think with Mark Vanilla singing, we'll be as close as what we could ever get to a Wetton Lake sound, So, and that's always important. The drums have got one sound, the keyboard's got another. Steve Howe had a distinctive sound on guitar. To try and keep all of those things in there, it's very, very difficult and it's hard. But, the recordings are still there, and they have been re-released, that's for sure, repackaged. But I think I'm okay with that. I never thought we'd be bringing this particular concert out on vinyl, but there is a call for it. There are collectors, there are big Asia fans. Whether or not people accept the new band, I mean, who knows? You just don't know. But the music is still strong, and we had a few hits back in the 80s. That's how I look at it. With Heat of the Moment, Only Time Will Tell, Soul Survivor, The Smile Has Left Your Eyes. There are a few in there, so who knows? This just might work.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great era of the band. I mean, the reunion albums are amazing, too. I mean, everything, I don't know, I'm a huge fan. I'm getting a little too fanboyish here, but just to kind of wrap up with the Asia stuff, we're about 20 minutes in. I don't want to keep you too long. I did have the chance. I mean, I was very blessed. I was able to interview both John and Greg before they passed away. But
good.
John said, I remember him, and this always stuck with me, that he always felt like Alpha was rushed and that they had so much pressure from the record company. And I think that he said to me specifically, we could have toured that first album for 3 or 4 years. Like, you could have gone into the Budokan and not released the second record.
Okay, so I mean, he's absolutely right. What happened there? That album was huge, and the mistake from a business point of view that Asia made was the following: when the album was released, it was so big. Obviously, MTV was the media we were using at the time, not just for the satellite broadcast, but with the various Godley and Cream DVDs that were made. What we didn't do, what Asia didn't do, we didn't build up what we call box office. So we didn't play in enough places around the globe, around the world, to actually give us the name that we should really have with that amount of sales success, as it were, on that first album. Because we didn't do that when the second album came out, and it was rushed a little bit because, it takes you 20 years to write your first album and you're given 20 minutes to write your second, it's one of those. But we did make a fundamentals mistake, which was, I can't just blame the management because we pay the management, they don't pay us. So we were part of the mistake. We went back in and we recorded another album where we could have stayed out quite comfortably, not 4 years, but we could have stayed out quite comfortably between 18 months and 2 years. And we could have built up a following which would have been stronger than what we had around the world. And we didn't. And because we didn't do that, Asia never seemed to be as big as what it should have been when you consider the sales that it had. So it was one of those things which was just the wrong move at the wrong time. You make some great moves like the satellite broadcast, then you make other moves which are just a little bit too rushed. And that was rushed because with that amount of success, what you do is you go and you work it for at least 2 years. And the reason why you want box office is it's very, very simple. If you make the wrong album, say like Alpha, not a wrong album, it's still sold incredibly well. But if you make an album that isn't as good as your first, if you have box office, if you have a following globally, it means that you will still go there and sell out, which is great. Which means that there are still people waiting for the right album. We didn't have that backing. We didn't have that insurance. So it became difficult. It became hard because now you're working with an album that sold, like 500,000, 1 million copies, 800,000 on that second album. And the first one sold 4.5, 5. So now you've got to work with something which is not quite there. Harder, much harder to do. But, in hindsight, you can always look back. It was one of the big lessons that I learned in my life, actually, that particular exercise with Asia.
Yeah, I mean, well, the other thing Wetton said to me was that he felt that the mix was really thin and that he wanted to go back in and mix it a little bit differently. I mean, it's definitely, in terms of feel and range, don't get me wrong, I love the record. There's some really strong cuts on it, but I could see what he was saying. There was something about that first album, there's just a certain oomph to it, like a bigness to it, that I think was sort of missing in Alpha.
What happened with the first album, the vocals were done analog, and then bounced across to digital. They were recorded analog, so they sounded bigger. We didn't go that route the second time. We didn't do that. Mike Stone, who did the first album, it was fantastic and all of that, no doubt about that. But we started to experiment a bit in the wrong way. And John liked to layer up so many vocals, duplicating, the same harmony, then changing the harmony, duplicating that, making this enormous vocal sound, which is great. And it sounds even bigger when it's recorded by analog. When you start to put something in a digital feed, it always sounds narrower. It doesn't sound as rock and roll. It always sounds a bit middle of the road. It always sounds slightly clubby, and you lose a little bit of the rock element. So you have to be careful, really. You can record analog, go to digital, and you'll get a good sound. When you record purely digitally, which we did on the second album, then the problem lies right there.
Yeah, well, that explains a lot. It makes a lot of sense. I'm actually very excited to hear this recording on vinyl. I mean, it's I just think everything sounds better on vinyl, especially if you have the right equipment. Well,
I mean, I've never understood that myself, but I mean, I'm not the I'm not the one to speak to, because I can hear crackles and pops with vinyl. Even if you use the heavy gauge vinyl that they use on Deutsche Grammophon. So there's various gauges of vinyl, right? They use the thinnest one in America, and they use one of the thickest ones over here in Europe, in Germany especially, Deutsche Grammophon. We've tried to obtain something between what America has got and what Deutsche Grammophon. There's always a cost element connected to these things, but when it's a thicker vinyl, you can cut it deeper, which means the sound is slightly better when you can cut deeper. You can only cut deeper if you've got more vinyl to cut into. But the problem with vinyl, unless you've got a perfect stylist, you're just going to have this problem with the needle. And, for me, there's always noise. I like it, but it's not for me, to be honest with you. But I'm not a collector, that's for sure. I enjoy having it, but I'm not a collector.
Yeah, well, and that's 3/4 of it for a lot of us. I mean, I'm speaking for myself, but I know other collectors, a lot of it, even just the colored vinyl and just the experience and everything.
I actually love it, believe it or not, the color vinyl, because there's an extra added art element in that. I mean, I love that. That's fantastic. But, I never go out of my way. I mean, I'm probably extremely silly, but I just got rid of a lot of my jazz albums and big band albums and rock albums, than vinyl. I never kept anything. I mean, I've got about maybe 50 or 60 in the house. But, you can imagine what I had before. I didn't keep any of them. I gave them away or gave them to a charity shop or whatever. I know now that they're obviously probably worth a lot of money, this and that, first editions or whatever the case may be. But I just, when CDs came out, I just enjoyed that sound better overall. When they took an analog vinyl, a vinyl which is analog basically, and put it onto CD, it was just clean every time. And I've had some good systems to play vinyl on, some quite expensive systems, but it's never been a big favorite of mine. Never been a big favorite.
So final question, I know you kind of teased it a little bit. I mean, what are the plans? I mean, it sounds like Asia's touring. You're going to recognize the 40th anniversary of the, I think you're probably going out with the ELP Legacy. I mean, you're a busy guy. I mean, what's coming up over the next 12 months for Carl Palmer?
What I've managed to do, and this is public knowledge now, I'm going to do this Asia tour, and we'll take that as far as we can. I'm looking forward to working with all the guys, Mark Bonilla especially, and obviously back with Jeff and Billy. We'll see where that takes us. We will go to Japan next year, as I mentioned. But at the end of this year, I'm going to launch. I've had the band, Carl Palmer's ELP Legacy for some time now, and it's been great, and we've introduced vocals over the last 18 months, so, we sing quite a few of the songs. I actually sing even myself now, and it's all good, and I love all of that. But what I decided to do way back in 2018, I looked at the hologram thing which was happening. I looked at the Whitney Houston stuff, the Ronnie James Dio. I actually went to a concert to see Frank Zappa here in London, actually, at the London Palladium. I saw all of that. I thought it was a bit spooky, and I wasn't too sure whether that was the right thing to do. So of having a hologram of Greg and Keith, I thought, if there's any way I could integrate them back into the show, because I don't believe just because they're no longer with us, you can no longer see them, It's a bit like the other day, we played and he had Lennon singing on the back screen, and all of that. So what happened was about 2021, I managed to get hold of a DVD that ELP had recorded live at the Royal Albert Hall here in London. There was 2 nights. It was a 5-camera, 6-camera shoot, 5 cameras for sure. And the audio, everything was separate, which means everything was, screened off, and you could analyze each thing individually. And I had to listen to it, and I thought, wow, sonically, this is absolutely superb. Let me just take a look at the live pictures. And I tell you what happened here, Tom. The actual DVD, when it was released, it was on Sanctuary. Sanctuary got sold to Universal, and this DVD got released right in the middle of that. So even though it was Emerson, Lake and Palmer, it got lost in the wash. These things happen, and we all know that. It actually works for me now, because I don't think it sold that many, about 10,000. It was nothing on a global level. It should have sold a lot more. There are clips of it up on YouTube. Anyway, I looked at all of the visuals of Greg and Keith, and I thought, that's how I remember them. I remember them playing just like that. And this was a phenomenal concert. I mean, the audio is just terrific. And, Keith, does his thing with fanfare with the daggers, riding his L100 across the stage, laying on the floor, playing it from behind, with the organ on top of him. And Greg sang unbelievably well. I'm thinking, this is what I should use. This footage. How can I integrate it? So anyway, to cut a long story short, I've just finished, before I got on the phone with you, I've just answered the email now whilst I'm talking to you. I've just finished the very last piece, which is Fanfare for the Common Man. All the edits are done on that. And we have a situation where I can have 2 large screens each side of the stage, like 14 foot by 8 foot wide, let's say, and a back screen as well, a digital wall. And I can put Greg and Keith on any screen at any time, whatever I want to do, and I can be up on the screen as well, and I'll be playing in situ. And I can have my band, Paul and Simon, playing along or reinforcing whatever I think. But there seems to be Knife Edge, Lucky Man, Fanfare for the Common Man, Paper Blood, from the beginning. There's about 5 or 6 pieces I can actually just play along on my own with Greg and Keith in situ. And with technology today, I can have all the click tracks in my earpiece and off we go. And, we can do a great version of Paper Blood straight into Knife Edge, straight into, Welcome Back, My Friends, and you name it, Lucky Man. So I'm thinking that I'm going to integrate that into the show, and it will be called The Return of Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And I'll have like 6 pieces I can play with the band, and then with Greg and Keith, and then with my guys, I'll do things like Hoedown and Tarkus and Carmina Burana and stuff. So I'm thinking that might be the most honest way to do it, because at least you'll see the guys in concert, what they actually did, not a hologram, pretending to play it. There they are on film. And the film, it's not IMAX standard. I'll make that very clear. It's not, because things have, got so much better since then. But the cleaning up on what we've done, it definitely, I would rather have it like this and see it than not see this at all, because it is good. And the most important thing to me would always be the audio, and the audio is absolutely superb. So I'm thinking that, it might be accepted by the major sort of ELP fans. And I want to launch it at the end of the year, play 4 or 5 concerts, maybe even more, and then launch it properly in 2023. I might have to do a bit more editing this year, might have to iron out a few lighting problems, or whatever the case may be. You can never tell. But once it's up and running, and I know it's working, then we'll be able to tour it on a global level. And I've already got ideas, if this works, where we can play things in the future like pictures at an exhibition, and then have edits where Greg comes on and sings the songs and things that were in pictures. And there's another piece called Tiger in the Spotlight, which was a great piece we had here in Europe, where we had a live tiger in the studio. That footage is really, really good. So there's definitely ways of me developing it as well. I think that's why I've spent so much time on it, because it's probably the last thing that I can do as far as the Emerson, Lake and Palmer package is concerned. And both the families, the Lakes and the Emersons, are right behind me, and they're all for it. And they've been, I've kept them involved all the way along the line. So, that's what I'll be doing after Asia. And then we'll see what Asia, wants to do next year. But I'll definitely be out with this Emerson, Lake and Palmer show the early part of next year, that's for sure.
Wow, that sounds great. I know Bruce Pilato, your manager's a Western New York guy, Rochester, Buffalo. So hopefully we'll get to see shows from Asia and the CLP
I always rehearse up in Rochester. Even Asia's going to be rehearsing in the Rochester, Buffalo area. Actually, I think we're in Rochester, actually. There's a small theatre we've got there. I always rehearse my band up in Rochester. Rochester's always, listen, it's a lot of bands, even American bands, before they hit New York, would rather play somewhere out of town. And Rochester, Buffalo, the casino, they're 2 places. Is it the Blue Flag Hall or the whatever conference center in the middle of Rochester? Rochester, Buffalo are places where, you can rehearse, get paid for a rehearsal concert, if you see what I mean. Yeah. You can rehearse there, then go and play a concert, a proper concert, before you take it anywhere where you're really going to be scrutinized. So, those areas and those towns have become very handy for that type of thing. If you look at the amount of people that have launched their tours in Buffalo or Rochester, it's just unbelievable, whether it be David Bowie or, I don't know, Kiss or Emerson, Lake and Palmer or Yes or whoever, it's always been very, very handy. There's also some very good sound companies in the area, believe it or not.
Yeah, no, I live right dab smack between the 2 cities. The town I'm in is called Oakfield. It's near Batavia, but I can catch shows. Oh, yeah,
Batavia. Batavia is where one of our main sound guys is, Sebastian, who he lives. Well, he's got a warehouse in Batavia, and I think he does all like the Rochester Jazz Festival and supplies all the PAs for the various stages they have there and things. He has a satellite office down in Florida, but he's got his storage in Batavia. We were actually thinking of rehearsing there in one of his warehouses that he got, but we've got this small theatre now in Rochester, which I just was sent the information on it the other day. And it looks, I've given it the thumbs up. Jeff's seen it, so that's where we'll be.
Oh, well, cool. Well, very good. All right. And then I assume you're going to have a show in Rochester then as well for the Asia tour, or?
Right now, the Asia tour, we have about 9 concerts, and the routing for these concerts is not really established yet. Okay. We are performing, as you know, with Alan Parsons. It's like a double header. And what's going on there at the moment is Alan now needs 4 days off. There's some procedure that someone in his family is going to have, and he needs to take this 4 days off to make sure everything is fine and be with them, whoever it might be. So we have to put in some dates there ourselves in casinos and things, which is probably what we'd do as Asia. So we don't have a real routing plan at the moment, but we are looking at about 20 concerts altogether, and I would imagine there would be a good 15 of them, if not more, with Alan Parsons.
Yeah, he was the very first person I ever interviewed was Alan Parsons. I was...
Well, we've actually played with him before in Asia. Already played with him this year in February down in Florida. I did 3 concerts with him. So there's always been a strong connection with Alan, and he's a lovely guy, lovely man.
Yeah, very good. Oh, he's a wonderful interview. I had such fond memories of it, and God, just it's so weird because they just didn't really tour back when they were around, and then in recent years he's really embraced it, probably because of the technology. But that's that's a great pairing.
That sounds really good. I mean, we had 3 concerts with him in February in the Florida area. We left them, and then 5 of the people in his crew, I think actually 3 in the band and 2 in his crew, got COVID, so he had to cancel. So I mean, it's been tough, but we carried on. I carried on with my band. I think we played 15 concerts in all. 3 with him, and then we did another 12 on our own, and everything was fine. It was only when the guys came home, a couple of them got COVID, and that was pretty bad, So we've just done an English tour with my group, and everything was fine there. Actually, 3 weeks. We finished 3 weeks ago, and we did 23 concerts here in the UK, and that was great. But it's taking its time. It's taking its time to all come back. I mean, I've cancelled 3 times in Europe, because of various problems over there and things. And who knows when I'll go back there and play? So we just have to wait and see.
Yeah, it's nothing. Everything's still a little bit uncertain, but. Hey, listen, thank you so much, man. This has just been a real joy, and I just said I've interviewed you before. You're fantastic, and I've been so fortunate to see you perform live in so many different configurations. And man, you just seem to really still love it, which is great.
Yeah, I mean, I can't sit at home with a remote in my hand, I mean, listen, I've been skiing today, there's an indoor ski dome here with real snow. So I've been out skiing today. I'll have a practice a bit later, I'll probably go out and eat. What more do I need in life, So I need to play because, believe it or not, I'm actually still getting better. So I want to see how far I can take this.
Awesome. Well, I know you're fans, and I speak for all of us. We're very happy you're still doing it. It still creates a lot of great memories for us, and just some great times. So I hope. Thank
you for the interview. I very much appreciate it.
Oh, pleasure's mine. I'll send you the link. Well, I'll send Bruce the link when it's up. We'll probably run something next week in the paper.
Please do that. We'll take a look.
All right, man. Well, we'll see you on the road one of these days.
You take care and you have a great day, and thank you once again.
Oh, thank you, Carl.